This is the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heening. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome to another edition of the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined by Rob Riches and Dan Heening. So here we go. Training camp officially begins on Friday, September 14th. The Flyers are back on the ice. The preseason will begin on Sunday, September 16th, with a game on the road against the New York Islanders. So this week, we're getting you ready for the preseason and the start of training camp. We have a few things to talk about. We're going to look at the prospects that have a chance to make the roster, including one who may benefit from a spot opening up via injury. We're going to go back to the age-old topic of goaltending. We're going to recap rookie camp and the prospect game from Wednesday night that closed out rookie camp, and touch on a few other things that have happened that are noteworthy around the NHL as well. So let's go ahead and not waste any time. Let's get started. And guys, let's start with the news that came out recently about Andrew MacDonald, the injury in an off-ice workout that happens over the offseason. He's going to be out for 6 weeks with a lower body injury. And basically, there's two angles to this that I want to get your take on. One being the impact that it has on the lineup as it is, because he's been a fixture of the lineup, whether you like it or not, for the last several seasons now. And if that has any impact on a lot of areas, we've seen him go down with injury before, and it can either bring out the best in some of the other players that are on the roster at the time, the younger players especially, or it can completely throw off the penalty kill and everything else. And he's not a great penalty killer or a great defenseman by any stretch, but he's serviceable and he's a good player overall, that he fills a spot and still provides value. That being said, this also appears to open the door for a defenseman like Phil Myers, a prospect who does not have any NHL experience, but has a year of AHL experience under his belt and looks to be getting closer to being ready to make that jump to the NHL. So I just want to get your guys' take on it, how you're feeling about MacDonald's absence, and if this is Phil Myers' time.
You know, I did see a lot of activity once that news broke about Andrew MacDonald, how, oh, yeah, Andrew MacDonald's hurt, and, people almost celebrating that, because obviously we know where Andrew MacDonald stands at this point. He's one of those guys who gets a lot of hate because of his contract, and I just want to say that that's absolutely ridiculous for people to be kind of celebrating like that, because, yeah, he's nobody's going to mistake him for a Norris winner anytime soon, but when you look, he's that steady veteran presence, one of those guys who's, dependable. He wears the A on his sweater for good reason. It's never good to see somebody like him go down, and it's something where, no matter how much you may not like the guy, there's really no cause to celebrate for, something like that. And, as interested as I am to see if this does open a door for Phil Myers, I am also kind of curious as to what this does for Christian Folin as well, because we know at this point that he's pretty much brought in to be, kind of play the role of the seventh defenseman. And if you're asking me who's getting scratched, I'd much rather say him over Myers. But I wouldn't mind seeing this be Phil Myers' big break. But I would not be surprised if Christian Folin's able to step up as well.
Let me piggyback onto what Rob said. I think it's absolutely reprehensible, the people that celebrate Andrew MacDonald's injuries from last season and this year. First of all, the hate for him is straight up stupid. Like, people don't like him because of the way he plays, but it's also, emphasized by his contract. And you can't be mad at a guy for getting his payday, especially since it wasn't even him. It was his agent and Paul Holmgren. If anything, you should not like Paul Holmgren because he's the one that gave him the contract. But in terms of like the absence that he's going to have, he's the guy that does the things that nobody wants to do. Like, you rather have Andrew MacDonald block the shots, and he blocks a lot of shots. You rather have him do it than have an Ivan Provorov, even though he blocks a lot of shots, or a Shane Gostisbehere, or Travis Sanheim. You'd rather him do it because, first of all, he's good at it, and he doesn't seem to get too injured doing it. So you'd rather have the guy that's knowledgeable and blocking the shots do it. And he has an impact on the lineup. Like I'm going through the right on Cap Friendly right now on the Armchair GM on how the pairings could work without him. And it kind of rolls into the Phil Myers situation, because if you're going to have Phil Myers, you got to play him. But it's not a guarantee, since Ron Hextall really likes to slow cook his prospects. It's not a guarantee that Phil Myers is going to be in there, because you could roll for 2 weeks with Christian Folin on the third pairing with maybe Robert Hagg or Ratko Gudas, even though I don't know why you would put those two together. But with Folin, however you prefer to say his name, it seems like he doesn't really care. It seems like it has a little bit more balance, where you have, at this point, you don't really have to worry about Ivan Provorov or Shane Gostisbehere. Like, at this stage, they're veterans. Like, Ivan Provorov, even though he's a couple years into his career, you trust him. He's going to make mistakes, but you're not going to worry about him. He's set. He's the number one. Don't worry about him. And Shane Gostisbehere, he's one of the most experienced defensemen on the core now. So you're not worried about those guys. But you got to still worry about Travis Sanheim and where he's going to go, because he only played a few games last year. Like, not a minimal amount, but still enough to where you still want to see how he's going to bounce back this year. And it's the same thing with Robert Hagg. So you kind of want to have veterans with them. And then if you have Phil Myers in there, the whole thing gets blown up. Maybe you have to put Phil Myers with Gudas or Gostisbehere, and then you're breaking up the Gostisbehere-Provorov pairing. So it really is intriguing how Andrew MacDonald's injury is going to impact the Flyers core for at least the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as to how the lineup plays out as well, just because I know that toward the end of the year, when you have Provorov and Gostisbehere paired up, and that's certainly a pairing that has potential to work, because Provorov is so responsible in all phases of the game, while Gostisbehere is still the offensive-minded play driver in a way, but getting better progressively defensively over the years that he's been a veteran. And that's the one thing you can't deny anymore. These are veteran players now. Provorov's going into year 3, Gostisbehere year 4, and they're veterans to this team now. I don't think you have to worry, I don't think there's ever any reason to worry about Ivan Provorov at any point right now, just because will he make mistakes? Sure he will. But then again, I've gone to games that the Flyers have played in years past, and I've seen Brent Burns make mistakes, and I've seen Erik Karlsson make mistakes, and I've seen Victor Hedman make mistakes. The best still make a mistake every now and then. They're not perfect by any stretch, even if they are Norris Trophy winners or candidates or anything like that. So the best will still make a mistake every now and then. He can't play his game afraid to make a mistake, and I don't think he does. I think he goes out there and just gives everything he has. I think you learned a lot about him in the playoff series against Pittsburgh, where he goes out there for Game 6 and says, basically, my arm was attached, so I was playing in the game. And did he have any reason to? Would anybody have blamed him if he said, it's hurting too much and it's a really bad injury that would require a lot of recovery time, I can't play, I can't go? I don't think anybody would have blamed him for it, but he's a warrior because he goes out and does what he has to do. I agree with what Dan was saying about how Andrew MacDonald's that guy you like absorbing the block shots side of things, and Provorov's going to do it, and Hagg's going to do it, and sure, you're going to have other guys, Gostisbehere and Sanheim will probably get in on that action a little bit, because as a defenseman, that's just where you are. You will block shots, whether you like it or not, but you're not actively looking to do it as much as MacDonald does, or Provorov sometimes goes kind of looking for it as well, because that's a part of his game that he puts a lot of emphasis on. He wants to be good in the defensive zone first and foremost, and that's probably why people almost don't even realize how much he scored last year. He gets 17 goals, and you're thinking, kind of, where did that come from? Because you know how focused he is as a defensive player. All of that being said, I'm interested in that dynamic that Dan brought up about the lineup and the defensive pairings, because he's right to the point where you don't want to cross too many lines here where it's too many. You don't want to break people up, but you don't want to have veterans paired together and rookies paired together, basically, or younger players. Logically, you could sit there and easily, I don't know why. I agree. I don't know if you're not going to play Myers. I don't know why you would want somebody like Folan with Gudas as your third pairing necessarily, but just because, just much like Gudas and Brandon Manning last year, it kind of just has a recipe for disaster. It's almost setting you up. I don't know, I have an idea of what Folan's skill set is and what he is, but without having actually seen it in person yet, I don't want to jump to conclusions on him and label him like Brandon Manning, but I also don't want to act like he's going to be what Provorov or even what Sanheim is at this point or something like that, or even Robert Hagg. I don't want to get into that and do that. If Myers makes the team and can find a spot in there, one pairing that you could think would be logical in one sense only really is Sanheim Myers, because they did play together in the minors, so there should be a familiarity there and a bit of a chemistry there. But also, you don't want to sit there and say, here's Travis Sanheim, basically year 2, and take on a bigger role, but be as responsible as you can be because Myers is your partner and he hasn't played in the NHL before. It makes more sense to me if Myers were to go alongside somebody like either Gudas or Hagg and be able to have somebody more reliable, or even if you split people up at that point and you put Myers with Gostisbehere or something like that, or Myers with Provorov and let him, and the difficult part with that is Provorov's getting top pairing minutes, so you don't necessarily want Myers to be playing 20 minutes a night when he's a rookie. He's going to get the third pairing minutes probably, but if you're going to bring him up here and have him start the year, he's got to play. I don't see any logic behind telling this kid you've made the team and then still playing Folan over Myers and putting the 7th defenseman label on Myers, even if it's for 2 weeks. I don't see the logic behind that. So I'm of the sense that if the door is open for Phil Myers, then it's open for a top 6 spot, because he's not going to make the roster serving as the 7th defenseman. If you're going to, obviously for 2 weeks, you're going to need a 7th defenseman, then go with the other options. Bring up TJ Brennan and say you're sitting in the press box for 2 weeks, and it won't hurt you any by just going to practice for 2 weeks and then going back to the Phantoms when MacDonald comes back. There's no harm in that. I don't know that there's any harm in doing it to a guy like Reese Wilcox either, which is another name that Ron Hextall mentioned. I don't see harm in bringing somebody who wasn't really on the radar here up to sit in the box for 7 or 8 games. I do find it to be a problem if you're going to take Phil Myers from being a number 1 defenseman in the AHL to a number 7 in the NHL and not playing at all. That would be a big mistake. So if the door's open, it's got to be open for a spot that plays regularly. So speaking of Phil Myers, let's talk about other prospects and the chances that some of them would have, or anybody has, in making the roster. Because for the first time in a while, it feels like the Flyers roster, or the opening night roster at least, is fairly predictable going into camp, unlike years past where you were watching prospects and going, are they ready? Are they not? You feel like you have a better sense of who's going to make the roster and who's not. But there are a few wild cards that could come into play. It doesn't mean that there aren't roster battles going on, but they're kind of few and far between, and there were a lot more of them in the last couple of seasons. So I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit, because obviously all eyes are on Morgan Frost and Carter Hart at training camp now that we've moved on from rookie camp. But there's other players who are vying for bottom 6 spots on the roster too, who could, be based on having a little bit more experience, probably might be more logical options. Among them, I have down a couple of names we all brought up last week: Mikhail Vorobiev, Nicolas Aube-Kubel, and Mike Vecchione. And these are 3 guys who should make some noise in camp, or at least be focal points, because they seem to be bubble type players as well. So I'm curious as to where you guys think those guys stand, or if there's any other roster battles that we might be missing here in terms of just players who might pop up on the radar that we're not thinking of.
Well, I mean, in terms of players that could potentially make the roster. You have to look at the spots. We were looking at the opening for Andrew MacDonald, and with Phil Myers, a spot in the top 6 defensively. The only real spot you can have is there's an extra forward spot, and the easiest one to pick out is third line center. Could easily be fourth line center if Scott Laughton has a good training camp, and so that's really what's driving the hype for Morgan Frost, because you can easily plug him into a top 9 situation, have him play with potentially like an Oscar Lindblom or a Michael Raffel and Wayne Simmons, any number of players, because the Flyers are really deep at their forward core. It's probably the deepest they've been since 2012. Like Mikhail Vorobyev, he has a really good chance of being that fourth line center. I don't really see him potentially being third line, especially since Laughton has that experience over him. I'm really interested in seeing where the organization's going to go now too with Taylor Lear, because he was with the team for most of the season and just fell off the face of the earth towards the end. And I want to see how he performs in training camp, if he's going to play with his hair on fire. I trust that he doesn't want to sit in the press box for the majority of the season like he did last year. I'm just wondering who he can beat out. He's obviously he's going to be competing with Oscar Lindblom, but I don't really see Oscar Lindblom not making this team. He's already shown he has the offensive flair. He had a ton of chances when he first came up. He just didn't cash in, and then he started scoring, and he had really good chemistry with Nolan Patrick and Jake Voracek. So he's easily a top 9 player on this team, and you don't really want to push him off to the side for Taylor Lear. There were names that we were brought up before too. I'm unsure of Michael Vecchione, just where he would fit, because he's a smaller guy, and so obviously a fourth line type of player. But is he a center? Is he a winger? I would be more prone to think that he's a winger in the situation. I'm still looking at Danik Martel because of that speed, and he had a really good showing when he was with the Flyers last season. And I'm just curious to see what the Flyers are going to do. Like we're going to talk about net later. I think that Alex Lyon has a legitimate shot, and I think he has a better shot over Carter Hart.
Morgan Frost is a name that very much intrigues me because of the gaudy numbers that he was able to put up with the Sioux Greyhounds last year, and obviously because he's still relatively new. He's not somebody who joined the fold until last year. Just it's one of those guys who has put up a lot of good numbers, and one of those guys who really could make an impact. So I am curious to see how he is able to handle this training camp competition, and if he is able to kind of carve out a spot for himself. And I was also always interested in Aube Kubel, just because he's one of those guys who I feel like had a lot more buzz a couple of years ago. But as the Flyers have grown their prospect cupboard and kept expanding and kept building, he's one of those guys who not necessarily has fallen out of favor, but one of those guys who's just kind of regressed back to the mean. So I am interested in seeing what he can do, because he's got that AHL experience now. He is somebody who could potentially be able to jump up to the next level, but we'll definitely see what he's able to do.
I'm going to first of all, I want to throw out something to you guys, because let me start with Oscar Lindblom for a second, just because I had this as something for when we get into the rookie game, but we might as well lump that in a little bit here because it applies. So the rookie game on Wednesday night, the Flyers win that game against the Islanders 6-3, and Oscar Lindblom had a hat trick in the game. He had 2 assists as well, and I called his performance kind of that he has the look of a man among boys in that situation. He's too good for a rookie game at this point. If nothing else, that game on Wednesday told me everything I need to know about Oscar Lindblom moving forward for this year. It's not telling me how well he's going to play at the NHL level over the course of the whole year, or that it's not saying that he won't have some struggles or go into some slumps offensively at times.
Are you saying that by and large he was the best player on the ice in last night's game?
Far and away the best player on the ice in that game.
What about Kiefer Bellows for the Islanders?
Kiefer Bellows is interesting to me. And here's why he's interesting to me, because once again you had a situation in watching that game on Wednesday where it's a game situation where you get a look at Yerman Rubtsov for a second, and Rubtsov's taken in the first round the same draft year as Bellows.
Right.
And Bellows has his flaws, for sure. I mean, he doesn't look like he's the crispest skater out there, and he kind of, at one point in time, he kind of let his temper get the better of him and took a penalty for that and things of that nature. But he goes to the net. He scored a goal on a deflection on a power play. He was on a line with Josh Ho-Sang and I don't remember who the other part of that top line was for the Islanders, but though that trio was buzzing the whole night. They were getting the most quality scoring chances there were. It might have been I know Ho-Sang was playing with Pius Suter at one point in time. They combined for a goal. And that's just a few guys who, and things like, and not to mention on the blue line, that the Islanders had Noah Dobson out there and guys like that. And they didn't, from what I could tell, I don't think they played a couple of decent prospects they have either in Michael Del Col and Sebastian Aho, defenseman Sebastian Aho, spelled exactly the same way as the Carolina Hurricanes forward. So there's confusion there, but regardless,
I don't think he understands that identity theft is not a joke. Millions of families suffer each year.
If identity theft is not a joke, then just hope he doesn't ever get traded to Carolina or vice versa.
Yeah,
because that's going to confuse people.
Yeah, I was because the Islanders prospect situation almost intrigues me because you know that you have a lot of those guys that are coming up and there's that hunger with John Tavares leaving. Those guys, they want to step up and they want to be the next top dog. And obviously Matt Barzal's in a place where Matthew Barzal's in a place where he's in a position to be able to try to do that. Obviously he's not going to be put up he's not going to mean as much to the franchise as Tavares did, but obviously those guys are hungry and they're going to want to try. I was following along with your coverage of that rookie game last night, Kevin, and as always, superb work. But it's one of those things I had wanted to watch that. I was curious, but I actually tuned into the TSN webcast of it was the Humboldt Broncos season opener, their first game since their tragic bus crash back in April, which was something, an emotional night on its own in and of itself. I mean, it was absolutely incredible to watch those boys take the ice.
I'll second that because after the rookie game was over, I flipped over. It was televised on NHL Network, and I caught a little bit of that. I actually saw flipped over in enough time to be able to see the first goal of that game and to see them score. It's a shame they actually didn't come out with the victory, but a competitive game. They were very much in it, and it's good to see that community come back to a rink for sure. To go back to the prospect game and some of the other prospects there too. So the reason I'm bringing that up is Lindblom to me isn't even a question anymore. He should be close to a lock to make this roster. That kind of brings into question at this point. I kind of wanted to relay this to you guys because this was while I was doing the coverage. I got a tweet during the game through the Flyerdelphia Twitter account that suggested, what if Hackstall put Lindblom, Patrick, and Konechny together on a line? And got some chemistry with that. What are your guys' thoughts on that as a line combination?
I've been wanting that line to be together since none of those players were in the league. It just seems like it's bound for great chemistry just because you have the speedy playmaker, sniper type in Travis Konechny. You have the player in Oscar Lindblom that goes right to the front of the net, drives home rebounds, and then you have the top pick type in Nolan Patrick who can score, make plays, use his body. I feel like that line could potentially be it could be a great line, but you have to be very careful with this particular team in putting that all together because you still have to remember that Nolan Patrick's going to be in his second year. Travis Konechny really found his game early on last season and was able to reach those heights with pretty much playing on the first line with Sean Couturier and Claude Giroux. And then you still have to monitor how Oscar Lindblom is going to play because once again, he only came in towards the end of the season and he stuck and he played well, but I still have to, see how these guys develop in their NHL play away from each other before you try and throw them all together. And like obviously they'll score, but you really have to worry how they'll play defensively.
I think that's a line you can just go ahead and call them the Skid Row line, because that is youth gone wild right there. That is something. I mean, obviously, that's one of those things I wouldn't mind seeing a couple of years from now. Kind of to piggyback what Dan's saying, when those guys are established, once those guys do have a couple of seasons of NHL, a couple more seasons of NHL play under their belts, and once they're able to kind of handle and adjust to the rigors, once those guys are a little older, I mean that's going to be that would be a fun line to watch. That's something I wouldn't mind seeing personally. But right now, I mean, these guys are, with the exception of Konechny, who's still got, he's going into his third season. He's a guy who's fun to be watching, but he still has a bit of a ways to go, as does Patrick and Lindblom. Obviously Patrick and Lindblom, new additions to the team at different points last year. So once those guys are able to kind of get a little more seasoning, that's a line I wouldn't mind seeing someday.
Well, and it's interesting that you both kind of talk about that in a way, especially what you just said, Rob, because the tweet suggested putting them together and then called it, let the future number one line get used to each other and get some chemistry. And I'm not going to deny that that's not a possibility down the road, that once you're talking, everybody works their way through the system here, and as players start to leave, who are much more established veterans because their careers wind down, or as they could still be with the team and as their roles change, yeah, you would start to elevate those guys. It's really early to talk about that, just because, for one, I don't know if you put that line together today. I'm trying to figure out how you would restructure the other ones, because for most of the offseason, the talk has been Konechny's going to probably or should stay on that right wing of the top line with Couturier and Giroux. And then your second line was Nolan Patrick at being the center, but you were going to put two veteran players with him. You were going to put James Van Riemsdyk and Jake Voracek with him. And then the third line, Lindblom was going to have whoever wins that center job. And it could be a veteran player. It could be Scott Lawton, who by this point is certainly an established veteran player, and then Wayne Simmons. So you could certainly see how you could avoid putting three very young players with basically less than 3 years of experience each together and still give them the resources. Konechny on a line with Giroux makes a ton of sense, because and Couturier too, not just because they're veteran players, but they understand the defensive responsibilities of the game. They could make Konechny a better defensive player. I think Nolan Patrick's got that to his game already. I just don't know if I want him to have to be that reliable as compared to the other two, because I don't know that Lindblom's going to give you that all the time, and I don't know that Konechny's going to give you that all the time. So it would really, I think you'd see Nolan Patrick get more exposed as a defensive player if you had two younger players with him effective immediately, as opposed to putting him around veteran players who should know better and shouldn't be putting the team in a bad situation where he has to be extra responsible in that situation.
I would like to throw in real quick, Kevin, that the Flyers are not deep enough at center to really make this happen and it actually work, and it actually not, like, if you put these guys together, third line would really work, because they would be playing, a pairing that wouldn't be as, it wouldn't be a number one or number two pairing, really. You'd be going off a third pairing potentially most of the time. But the catch to that is you'd probably have to move Giroux back at center. And I don't know if you want to do that, because that could just put more extra miles on him. And then you might, towards the end of his contract, you might not get the guy that you want to have at that time.
I completely agree with that. I don't want Claude Giroux back at the center position for the sole reason that it did wonders to his offensive game, because he was allowed to focus on his offensive game again instead of being the complete two-way player all the time. I mean, it's not to say that he doesn't have defensive capabilities and he wasn't defensively responsible last season. He was. But you want him to be an offensive catalyst. You want him to be thinking about scoring goals again. I mean, for all the years that Giroux was talked about as a guy who couldn't break 15 goals or barely broke 15 goals because he doesn't shoot the puck enough. He passes too much and he's too passive. He's not aggressive and he doesn't go for it all the time. And he's not that active offensive mindset kind of guy all the time. Does 34 goals change your mind? Does 102 points change your mind a little bit about that? You switch his position, and all of a sudden, here comes the offensive player that was there 5 years ago, that everybody saw the flash of greatness and thought this is the guy who's going to be the leader for years to come, and then got fed up with him because he wasn't scoring enough in their eyes. He makes one simple switch, goes to the wing, Couturier goes up. It elevates both of their games, and it changes the whole complexion of the season at a certain point because they started having success. They made it work, and they both turn in career years as a result. So I don't want to change anything with that grouping at all, and that's why I just think Konechny's game gets elevated by being with them also. That's the other thing about it. I think right now his game gets elevated because he's able to go and do that kind of stuff on the ice. He's able to go and just be that player and be a bit of a playmaker in that regard because he's not the veteran of a line at that point. He is the kid of the line at that point, and I'd rather see that. What it brings into question at that point is, again, it turns the depth at center kind of around a little bit because of the fact that now you have to figure out where you're filling the void from. Basically, right now, I mean, you could look at Giroux, Couturier, Patrick, and Lawton and say there's your 4 centers right there. But you like what Giroux's giving you as a winger, so you're going to try to keep him on the wing. You might be, at this point, you might be moving a guy like Jordan Wheel to center. You might be playing Lawton as your third line center and bringing somebody in for the fourth line. There's a lot of possibilities. So that's kind of where that's at. To kind of go back on that fourth line center kind of thing and the other prospects we had talked about a little bit, I'm going to kind of put a little bit of a take out here on this, and I'm not going to build this up to be anything big. I just don't think Morgan Frost is quite ready yet for the NHL. I thought he had moments of greatness in the rookie game, but I don't think he has the complete package yet to be an NHL player. I think he's going to be overmatched. I'd give him one more year of juniors and let him continue to grow, continue to add size and strength to his game, and continue to mold and grow everything that is in his skill set. He can still benefit. It's different for Morgan Frost after the type of season he had a year ago than Nolan Patrick from last year, where it was, what more can Nolan Patrick learn by playing in juniors? Nothing. He's too good for that competition. I don't think there's anything wrong with letting Morgan Frost play in juniors, get a full season of juniors. He's more than qualified to be part of the World Junior team for Canada, and that I think he should be a part of that as well. I think if we're talking about Carter Hart going pro and being close to trying to make that jump to the NHL or just needing a little bit of time in the minors possibly or whatever, I think Carter Hart's a better goalie from 2 years in World Juniors and getting that experience and being on a big stage where an entire nation is watching and resting their hopes on you. So I think he's better for that. And I think Morgan Frost could be better from one more year in juniors, getting that World Junior Championship experience and trying to be a focal point of a team that could go out and win gold again. And all of that. I look to the guys that's why I look to the other 3 guys. I look to the 3 guys who have been there, done that in the AHL and have played a little bit. I wonder a little bit about Vorobiev. I like his skill set a lot. I think he's got almost underrated potential for scoring in that sense. Like, I think he could be a decent offensive player, but his calling card here is going to be the defensive play and being a centerman who can possibly come in and help out on the penalty kill right away, but still do other things. They used him in the power play during the prospect game. So I think there's a lot of ways you can fit Vorobiev. I just don't know if he has enough experience to turn the heads of everybody who needs to see him prove himself. I'm kind of lukewarm to the other 2 guys as well in the beginning, because I don't know what to expect from them in camp this year. Aube-Kubel has been a good AHL player for the last couple of seasons now. It's just a matter of if he comes in and really can take that next step to be that kind of player. And same thing with Vecchione. I don't know. He missed a little bit of time last year. I don't know if he's going to be that guy. I think he could be a fourth line center, but I don't know. It's just too tough to say. So I don't know where they're going to turn for this right now. I don't know that you don't want to kind of admit right away that if it's not Jordan Wheel centering the third line, then you hope it's Scott Lawton, and even if it is Scott Lawton, what are the odds that Yuri Laterra is your fourth line center to start the year? I mean, I think that's where we are right now, and
That's
somebody's
still a
going to
fair
have to.
chance.
Yeah, oh yeah, and because I think somebody's going to have to step up, and I just don't know. Out of that trio, I think Vorobiev has the best chance of being the guy who steps up because I do think he's motivated, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to win him a spot. I agree with what Dan said about Carter Hart. I think Alex Lyon has a better shot to make the roster than Carter Hart does. If there was anything that the first period of this prospect game told you, while nothing was really, Carter Hart lets up 3 goals in the first period of this game. And while there wasn't one of them that was on him in a glaring way, you also just saw he had they had a target for where they wanted to go when they were shooting on him in that first period. Everything was glove side high. Let's shoot glove side high. And little tough to sit there and say that about Bellows' goal, which was a deflection. Deflections are difficult. But you look at, there was Pius Suter had a goal kind of on a quick shot from the high slot almost, and it was glove side over the shoulder. And then the first one was a quick release. It was Jeff Kubiak scored the goal, and it was a quick release that went 5-hole on him, and I think just caught him off guard. That's enough for me to see a guy who still needs to get some experience under his belt at a professional level, because professional players are going to be able to do things. They're going to be able to do things that he wasn't seeing in the WHL. I look at Hart's second period from that game, and I see exactly what everybody else has seen for so long now. The sky is the limit with this kid because he can position himself very well, that in situations that certainly look dicey, and for any other Flyers goaltender that we've watched over the last 5 years, maybe 10, has resulted in just chaos in the crease and a goal being scored. He still looks fairly calm, and he looks like he's in control of those situations. So I love the skill set on him. I think his potential is sky high, but it's not going to equate to, you got everybody who is thinking that he's going to be the savior effective immediately. You've got to get off of that mindset, because he's not going to come in here and make it work this year. And it's not just because they have other players who are basically more locked into those spots than he is. It's because he just needs the year. He needs the year, part of it anyway, to get some experience in the minor leagues and see professional games and see professional players and get a feel for that. And if he does that really well, then should something happen to Brian Elliott or Michael Neuvert or both, or anybody else who's in the system, he could be getting a call at that point. That's when that kind of stuff can happen, but not to start the year. I think personally, I mean, look, Alex Lyon, to me, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's a great option to be a starter by any stretch. He's got some things to work out because his positioning isn't always perfect. That's one of the areas I think Hart's got him beat already. Hart's way better at maintaining his position and tracking the puck than Lyon is, but Lyon does a decent job of it. Lyon's got an edge on Hart from the experience, and he's got an edge on Anthony Stolarz because of the experience too, because Stolarz basically missed the entire year last year. You might as well call it that, even though he played in 4 games. He basically missed an entire year, and I don't want to give up on Stolarz yet either, but he's not going to be part of any discussion around the NHL for a little while, because he's got to play in games, simple as that. And that's where that will come from. He's going to have to go to the minors in some capacity. Basically what I'm curious to see with the goaltending situation isn't necessarily what it is at the NHL level, because at the end of the day, we could talk about Lyon having a better shot than Hart to make the roster. I still think that Elliott and Neuvert are the 2 guys at the start of the year, because it's a contract year for both. They're under contract at the NHL level. That's who they're going with to start. We know that at some point in time, inevitably, someone will get hurt. It's happened every year, and it will continue to happen for right now, as long as that's the tandem that you're going with. So someone will get hurt and someone's going to have to step in, and that guy is probably going to be Alex Lyon. And what I'm curious, at least at the start of the year, to see is what the AHL goaltending situation looks like, because all three of those guys are eligible to go to the Phantoms, Lyon, Stolars, and Hart. And I'm curious to see, because in a situation where you want to be giving Hart games at the AHL level because he needs the experience, but you don't want to deny the other two opportunity to play. How are you going to rotate three goaltenders into a situation when it's difficult for teams to rotate two? That's what I want to see, and that's on Scott Gordon. That's his decisions to make, and I want to see how he does that. But in terms of any of those guys making the team, it's really tough to say. I think the door was open for Myers, and I think he's steady enough to make the team. And Lindblom's a lock, no question. Hart and Frost and guys like that, they're off to great starts. I'm not going to take anything away from them, but I do think that they're basically, Frost should be back in juniors, and I think Hart should be in the minors. I think it's just a logical path for both of them to be better players in the long run.
Yeah, I think that the issue with the Phantoms goaltending situation is you still have Anthony Stolarz coming off of that meniscus injury, which is it's still tough. I mean, granted, with all that we know in this day and age about sports science and medicine, I mean, it's something where, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would have been a completely different story. But that meniscus injury like that is still tough. When you're a goalie this day and age, when you're so reliant on your lower body to be as, flexible as you can, to get as low as you can, drop down on the butterfly. It's one of those things where that's a lot of wear and tear. So how he progresses from that injury is still something to keep an eye out for. And, obviously he may not, there is the possibility that he may not return to form, and it's something that could definitely slow him down. So that's something that could maybe clear that picture up at the AHL level, but that's still, a factor. I mean, something to keep an eye on.
It is important too, mentioning Stolars, Neuvert, and Elliott, all goaltenders either that are injury prone or coming off a serious injury. So Alex Lyon's going to have a really intriguing role throughout the organization, where he can just be something of a tweener, where if you think a guy's banged up at the NHL, he just hangs up there. But you still have Stolars, nursing his with, you don't quite know where he's going to be in terms of his game and his recovery. Like, he's obviously going to try and play, but you don't know how much you can throw onto his lap initially. So just to go along with what Rob said, you really need to have the five goaltenders, because you just don't know where Stolars is going to be in a month or two. You don't know if Neuvert's going to stay healthy. You don't wish anything on the guy. You wish that he would stay healthy, but you have a good chunk of evidence that he doesn't. And then you have Brian Elliott, who got injured a couple times last season. So you really see this opportunity for Alex Lyon, but he's just got to be something of a, wait. He has to wait in the weeds, if you will, just to, to get his opportunity in the NHL, and to balance that out. If I'm correct in this, in the AHL, you play 3 games in a row, right, during the weekend.
You can, yeah. There's not really a ton of them, as much as I feel like there used to be.
Yeah, it's a thing, but it's not like a regular occurrence.
I feel like in that situation, you just ease Stolars into it. So maybe you gave him like a game every 1 or 2 weeks, and you have him practice a little bit more. And once you get a feeling that he's back and he can play, then you kind of like, let him go a little bit more. But he's still kind of like the backup in the situation, because you definitely want to feed Carter Hart the more of the starts, because you want to see where he goes, how he develops. But even then, that's kind of tricky, because he's a rookie, and you still have Alex Lyon, who played very well in the AHL playoffs last season. So it's very interesting. You guys are absolutely right in terms of just being very intrigued by the goaltending situation at the AHL level. But I don't have any faith in either one of the 2 NHL goaltenders staying healthy. I have more faith in Brian Elliott staying healthy, but he still got hurt a couple times last season. And Michael Neuvert doesn't stay healthy. I wish the guy would, but he gets hurt so many times. I think he might have to retire soon, just because you don't know if the guy can just stay in a lineup and play and give you the 20 to 30 games that you need. I don't know if he'll get a contract after this season.
I was going to say the same thing. This is a big year for him, just because you don't know where this is going to go. If he can't stay healthy here over the course of the next season, he won't get a contract here. And then who else is going to want to take a goalie who's injury prone? I mean, there's teams out there that could probably use a guy in a backup role and feel comfortable enough to give him a contract, but what kind of contract is he going to get? Probably just a 1-year deal that's low risk, high reward type for a team. I think Stolarz is absolutely, without question, the X factor in this whole goalie picture here in terms of the 5 goalies, because I feel like you can understand. I feel like it's easy to figure out what the role is for each one, other than Stolarz. Elliott and Neuvirth are the guys who are going to start at the NHL, but as we said, they're injury prone. So Carter Hart's the future. He's going to probably be in the minors, but you never know when his time is going to come, because for whatever reason, good performance may warrant an NHL call-up even as early as this season, or the focus could just stick to play your game, play regularly, stay at the AHL level for 1 year, get your feet wet in professional hockey, and then you'll be ready. Maybe you'll be ready for the NHL then. Lyon's the big X factor in that. Lyon's a big player in this too, because like you said, Dan, if Lyon's probably the guy you go to if and when someone gets hurt. Well, the only way for Lyon to be that guy and be ready to go if and when someone gets hurt is for him to play games with the Phantoms. So if he's playing games with the Phantoms, Hart's not playing games, so you have to balance those two out effectively so Lyon remains ready to go at a moment's notice, but Hart's still getting some experience. And then where does that leave Stolarz? It leaves him with maybe a handful of games to be the same guy, as Lyon, and be maybe in a position where he's ready to go. One of the things that it'll come down to, truthfully, is the thing about the Flyers organization as a whole, going down to the Phantoms and beyond in the minors too, is that there's a level of pride in success, and they will do as much to make the Phantoms a successful team in the AHL as they will to make the Flyers successful in the NHL. So you're going to try to figure out the best situation to win games at the AHL level too with the goalies that are there. And if the time comes, of course you're going to help the NHL club in whatever way you can. But you're going to do what you can to win games at the minor league level. And if that's starting hard on a regular basis, then that's what it's going to be. If it's Lyon, that's what it's going to be. You'd never know. And I think that should be a bigger concern to people than whether or not Hart makes the NHL this year. Sure, everybody would love to see Hart be ready to go, and maybe he comes in. Look, he'd need to have an absolutely incredible, off-the-charts kind of training camp to be part of this roster on opening night. But I think a bigger fear should be not Hart missing out on the opening night roster in the NHL, but going to the AHL and then watching them play somebody like Lyon over Hart, when Hart's the one who needs to get the experience because he is the future of the franchise. So that should be a bigger fear to me than if he doesn't make the NHL this year. If he doesn't make the NHL this year, so what? Let him get a year of experience. But if he's not getting the experience in the AHL, then you have reason to be concerned. He should be playing for the Phantoms regularly this season. And if he's not, then something's wrong. So we have a few minutes left in the show this week, and I think we've touched on just about everything. A couple other notes from the rookie game that we didn't touch on. Other goals in the game to throw out there as well. We said Lindblom with the hat trick and 2 assists. Morgan Frost had a goal. Carson Twarynski had a goal. And Mikhail Vorobiev had a goal. Hart played the first 2 periods, allowed the 3 goals in the first period, but then was on point and shut out the Islanders in the second period. Liam Hughes played the 3rd period. He also held the Islanders off the board. Liam Hughes was one of 5 players in rookie camp on an ATO. And the reason the Flyers had done that is they have 10 players in their prospect pool who are college players who cannot participate in rookie camp or training camp because of commitments to their college teams. So they would not be participating until they signed an entry-level deal. There's 9 European players also that are in the prospect pool who have commitments to teams in Europe in some capacity that also cannot participate in those camps, even though they do participate in development camp for the team. Out of those 5, by the way, it looks like 2 players made it past the rookie camp and are still part of the training camp. Based on the groups that the Flyers are going to use on Friday at training camp, Group 1 includes Yegor Zamula, who was a defenseman on an ATO, and then Hughes is part of Group 2. That would give the Flyers 6 goalies, in camp, 3 for each group, and defensively, it looks like an even 8 per group, so that would be 16 defensemen, not 15. There were no forwards from the 5 ATOs. There were 2 forwards among that group to start with. Out of the 2 that were part of the 5, they both were not given anything to training camp, and same thing with the other defensemen as well. So basically at this point, let's touch on a couple pieces of news that were around the NHL that we wanted to get into, just because it was a busy week around the NHL. A lot of pieces of news coming out this week that were a little bit unexpected, especially with how close everything is to training camp starting, because you don't usually expect trades to happen this late in the offseason while it is still the offseason. But there were a couple that went down. There were 2 trades, a big contract given out, and a big front office move that we want to kind of just touch on. Let's start with just going down the order of events here. So first things first, the first trade that happened this week was Max Pacioretty going to Vegas. And that's an interesting deal. Just because of the fact that Pacioretty gets traded by Montreal, immediately signs a new contract in Vegas. So he's under contract with Vegas for the long term here, and it's a big move given where Vegas was a year ago and making it to the Stanley Cup final and all of that. And so it's a big move for them to add to their group and really take a big step in trying to be a contender again next season. So that was the first deal that happened. And that trade happened in the overnight hours. It felt like it was just really, it was something that we all woke up to. So, and it was something we all woke up to on Monday morning or Tuesday morning there in between. Kind of, it was Monday between both days, because he had signed within 24 hours, he was traded and signed the contract. Which also, by the way, the contract, a 4-year, $28 million deal, is kind of a target point for for forward deals. You kind of try to look for comparable forwards here, and people have been trying to pull out what Wayne Simmons might want in a contract after his contract is up at the end of the year. And that might not be a bad place to start in terms of him setting an expectation for himself or his agent trying to get the best deal for him. But you never know. Then you go to the next piece of news from the week, Steve Yzerman stepping down as GM of the Tampa Bay Lightning, which, again, just something that's interesting because he's built a lot of that team, and they've been contenders for the last several years. And they figure to be, again, they have a great, first of all, they have, based on one of the other pieces of news we're going to get into, they have fairly easy path to the playoffs, it feels like, again. And to me, they're one of the premier teams in the Eastern Conference. They have been for a while. They've got great pieces across the board, great forwards, a good defensive core. They have the goaltender. So it's a little surprising to see this happen at that time. Literally, this is a guy who in June was being everybody knew who was going to get the General Manager of the Year award at the end of the year, but he was a nominee for it, and that says a lot about what he did with the Tampa Bay Lightning over the course of that whole stretch of time. And in the playoffs too, they were one game away from being the team in the Stanley Cup final against Vegas and not Washington. So just very interesting to see that happen. And then the 2 things from Thursday that went down, Tyler Seguin re-signed with the Dallas Stars on a mega deal, 8 years, $9.85 million average annual. And that seemed like it was going to be the biggest news of the day until the Erik Karlsson trade finally happened. It's been a talking point, and we kind of saved that for last in the show this week because of the fact that Erik Karlsson has been a name that's been thrown around randomly by Flyers fans. Everybody knew he was available, and the idea was, well, would you look into trading for somebody like that? He's a big name, all that kind of stuff. He's going to be in a contract year next year as well. But the idea is that this big trade finally happens. He goes to the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks now have as formidable a blue line as anybody in the league. You're putting two Norris Trophy candidates on the same lineup in Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns. So they're clearly formidable there. And there's also what it does for San Jose, and there's what it does for Ottawa. Ottawa doesn't get a ton in return here. They get two NHL players in Chris Tierney and DeMello, and that's, they're kind of just, they're not pieces that jump off the page at you. They get a couple of prospects who you don't know if they're going to pan out, and they get a couple of conditional draft picks. So, it's not the biggest haul in return for an all-star, a captain, a Norris Trophy winner. There's a lot to it. So those are four pretty major stories from the week in hockey. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think it's absolutely it's amazing that in these two trades, in the Pacioretty trade and the Karlsson trade, that Max Pacioretty was the captain of the Montreal Canadiens. He was a 30-goal scorer, and Erik Karlsson is the best player in the franchise history of the Ottawa Senators. And they each did not get very much.
Best player not named Daniel Alfredsson?
I mean, Daniel Alfredsson says that Erik Karlsson is the best player in Ottawa Senators history. So if the man himself says it, I guess you got to take him for his word, right?
Fair enough.
But the return for that, like, Colorado got more. Colorado got more for Matt Duchene. And Matt Duchene is not better than Erik Karlsson. So this is just, I guess this was just a GM that just did not have enough time. Well, he didn't take enough time, or he had an owner that just said, end it. I'm tired of hearing about it. And I think out of all of those, like, kudos to the Dallas Stars for getting Tyler Seguin done. They didn't do what the New York Islanders did to John Tavares. You needed to get it done. He's a cornerstone of your team. You have a team that can make the playoffs this year, next year. You had to get him. You had to re-sign him. So kudos to them for getting it done, paying what you need to pay. He's a big reason why that team is competitive again. And then the most surprising thing to me was Steve Yzerman just stepping down. Now there's, in the rumor mill, it's swirling with the idea that he's going to go to Detroit. And if you thought he had a bad cap situation in Tampa Bay, he's going to have to take some time with Detroit, because that salary cap is bad. So
there was a school of thought that he could be clearing his way to either basically get out of Tampa, whether or not that's to go back to Detroit, or pending the results of the Board of Governors vote on expansion, take over the first Seattle job. And honestly, the one job that I don't want in hockey right now is the general manager of the new Seattle expansion of the potential. Seattle expansion team, because I think when you look at the success that Vegas had, and what George McPhee was able to do in Vegas's first season, that just really cranks up the pressure for Seattle. But if that does pan out, and Yzerman does end up eventually heading there, I think he's the right man for the job. And I remember there was a story that I had read a couple of years ago that when Yzerman initially left the Detroit front office to take over the Lightning job, it was because Ken Holland did not want to accept the promotion, and Jim Nill was still ahead of him as well. And obviously, a couple of years after that, Jim Nill headed down south to Dallas, and obviously that cleared a spot. And Ken Holland still has the job to this day. And but there was something that I had heard that the most upset person in Detroit to hear that Yzerman was leaving for Tampa Bay was none other than Marian Ilitch, the wife of now the late Mike Ilitch. And still, one of the owners, one of the principal owners of the Red Wings. She was very upset about that. So that's something where, maybe Yzerman wants to clear a path for, a reunion with the Red Wings and, give her something to be proud of one last time.
We should clarify too. He hasn't left Tampa Bay. He just stepped down. He's the senior advisor to the GM, so he's still going to be there. He's obviously clearing something out. From what I've read, he's homesick. His family still lives in the Michigan area, probably the Detroit area, because he played in Detroit his entire career. So they're probably still all in that area. So it makes a lot of sense if he wants to go back to and be the general manager of the Red Wings. He would receive a hero's welcome too, because that organization, Ken Holland doesn't want to just leave it in shambles. But if he has Yzerman to kind of take over, I'm sure he would gracefully now take a demotion promotion or whatever it is, pretty much the thing that Paul Holmgren got, where he was like, all right, you get to be the president, but we don't want you managing anything with the players anymore. Please, for the love of God, stop trading all of our young guys.
I mean, using the Flyers as a blueprint there, possibly, just because it's allowed. Look at what Ron Hextall's done since that move has been made. It's allowed them to restructure their cap completely. They have cap space again. They have a prospect pool again. That's what Detroit needs to be that team. And look, we do this and come on here and talk about the Flyers and obviously hope to see them successful. But, you look at Detroit and you think about a team that had such a playoff history to it, making the playoffs in 25 straight years. And in the last couple of years, it's been really, really bad. And to open up a new arena and have the features of the arena be really nice. I mean, it seems like it's a really nice looking arena. It looks really cool and all that type of stuff, but you basically give people a place to watch the game without going in to actually watch the game. So you're watching on television and you're seeing empty seats inside of the lower bowl of the arena because people are just out on the concourse because they can see everything. Which, speaking of which, by the way, the Flyers and the Wells Fargo Center has been undergoing some pretty major renovations over the course of the offseason, and I am certainly curious to see how that looks when the time comes. First preseason game at home for the Flyers is on Monday night, September 17th, and by all means, I'm hoping to see what everything looks like and how that's come along from the outside. There is a spot where you can see them putting in those windows they were talking about, where people can see would be able to see the skyline from the concourse and things like that. Curious to see how it all turned out, because they're supposedly widening the concourse to make it a little bit more easy to navigate and to get through and be more orderly for people waiting in line for concessions. The open air lounges sound like a great idea. I'm curious to see that as well. So lots of things happening. But most importantly, the fact that we were able to come on here this week and talk to you about a game that was played on Wednesday night, Flyers getting a win in the rookie game, that was awesome. We're going to have more coming up in the coming weeks because preseason is starting on Sunday. Games will be starting. Flyers have 8 of them in the preseason over the course of about 2 weeks. Starts on the Sunday, September 16th. Their last preseason game is Saturday, September 29th, and then that pretty much winds everything down until that last little stretch, a few days in between that last preseason game and the season opener on October 4th in Vegas against the defending Western Conference champions. So should be an exciting preseason. We'll have to see a lot of what happens with the kids that are trying to get these spots, and we'll see how it goes and go from there. And with that, we're going to wrap things up for this episode of the Flyerdelphia podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Flyerdelphia podcast. We are on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. As mentioned, there will be some video content that will go up there in the coming weeks, in addition to the podcast being posted on there as well. Also remember to check us out on SoundCloud as part of the Sports Talk Philly podcast network, where you can listen to us and our other shows about the rest of the Phillies sports scene. There is the Phillies Nation podcast on Sports Talk Philly that covers the Phillies, the Pick Swap pod covering the Sixers, and the Kelly Green Boys covering the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So next week, we'll be probably about 5 games into the Flyers' 8-game preseason, and we'll provide an update from there, thoughts on the game so far, players who have stood out, any roster moves that may be made in that time. By that point, certainly there will be a couple of cuts made. A lot of players eligible for juniors that aren't really in line or on the radar to make the team will probably have been cut by then and sent back to their junior teams. So that's certainly something we can talk about. We'll talk about players that have stood out as well that may be still making noise. Guys like Phil Myers, Carter Hart, Morgan Frost, if they're still all around, we'll certainly be talking about how they've done and so much more on the show next week. So once again, thanks for listening. For Rob Riches and Dan Heening, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia podcast on sportstalkphilly.com. This has been the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heening.